The ad said, "Cozy basement efficiency, $300 per month. Must be quiet. No guests after dark." I thought it was a scam until the landlord opened the wrought iron gate and led me down the concrete steps. He never gave a name, just a ring of tarnished keys and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The unit was weirdly perfect. Fresh white paint, a humming mini fridge, a bathroom that didn't smell like anything. Still, the ceiling was low, not like a normal basement low. It arched slightly, as if something heavy pressed down from above. The plaster bulged between beams like the underside of a tongue. "There are 3 rules," the landlord said, voice flat. 1, never bang on the ceiling. 2, do not feed it after midnight. 3, if you hear your name at night, ignore it. Paperwork's in the kitchen drawer. "What's it?" I asked, laughing too quickly. He only glanced up. "The upstairs." I signed anyway, because $300 in this economy is a miracle, and because running had become a habit. I'd split with my ex 2 months ago, and my old apartment had too many windows that remembered us. Down here, there were no windows, just one door with 3 locks and a ceiling that condensed a cool dew when I breathed too hard. The first night I lay awake, counting the hums and ticks of a place learning my rhythms. At 2:11 a.m., the humming paused, like the room was listening. Then I heard it, a slow, wet click from above, followed by a noise like a boot sinking into mud. I held my breath. The ceiling dimly pulsed. A fat bead formed at the bulge over the kitchenette and swelled until it fell, plip, into the sink. Clear, slick. It smelled like pennies. I slept on the couch after that, blanket over my head, laughing into the fabric every time the ceiling made another careful swallow. Day 2, there was a rent receipt slipped under my door. No footsteps, no shadow through the gap. Just the receipt, edges damp. "Thank you," someone had penciled, neat and childish. The handwriting looked like mine, dragged through water. By night 3, the noises had a rhythm, a long inhale through the vents, a held pause, then the wet private sounds of someone eating. Not fast, reverent. If I listened hard enough, I could almost hear chewing. When I told myself it was pipes, the ceiling throbbed a little, like it was laughing. I put on headphones and watched videos until my laptop died. At 3 a.m., the charger prongs were sticky. On day 4, I found the kitchen drawer the landlord mentioned. Beneath the lease in a dried-up Sharpie was a glass jar of pale, soft rectangles. I thought it was soap until I saw the roots. Tiny, black, like charred hairs. Teeth. Human. Baby teeth. Mostly. A few too big. There was a note under the jar. "Start with milk. Ease it in." I threw the jar back into the drawer and scrubbed my hands so hard the skin shone. The ceiling was very quiet that night, which somehow made the room feel crowded, like the space above my head had been filled to the brim with something patient. On day 5, my phone alarm didn't go off. It showed 0000 no matter what I did. When I went upstairs to ask the landlord, the gate was locked from the outside. On the steps, I found a cardboard carton sweating condensation. Inside, 4 bottles of milk and a small slip of paper with one word in that same damp pencil. "Please." I brought the milk down because refusing felt impolite and because the ceiling was already slick with breath. At midnight, I stood on the chair and pressed the tip of one bottle to the plaster bulge. I don't know what I expected. not the soft parting of paint, not the way the plaster yielded, dimpled, then opened on a split I hadn't noticed before, a seam the length of my forearm, a tongue, pink, pale as a scar, slid out to taste the rim. I dropped the bottle. It didn't shatter, it vanished. The seam widened, a smile in reverse, and I saw the dark beyond. Not an attic, not rafters, throat. It drank, slow, delighted. The room exhaled through the vents, warm and milky. When the bottle emptied, the seam puckered shut, as prim as a grandmother's mouth. Something above me sighed my name, not a voice, a shape made of air. And I remembered Rule 3, and went to the couch and pulled the blanket over my head and prayed to a God I didn't trust to notice. I slept. I dreamed I was small and soft and falling out of someone's smile. In the morning, a clean bottle sat in my sink, rinsed and drying on a towel I didn't own. My rent receipt was updated with a new line item. Offerings accepted. I didn't say anything. I didn't leave. I just circled the rules on my copy of the lease and underlined "ignore it" until the paper tore. By the second week, the upstairs had settled into a schedule. At 12:06 a.m., the seam would loosen and wet the paint like a kiss through fabric. At 12:10, the sigh would drift through the vents, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. If I held my breath, it held its. If I sneezed, the ceiling rippled in sympathy. We were learning each other. I called the landlord exactly once. He didn't answer. The voicemail picked up on the second ring and played a recording of my own voice saying, "Leave it here." Then a wet click and the beep. I hung up and didn't try again. I rationed the milk. When it ran out, another carton appeared on the step, already beading cold sweat. Sometimes there was a second note tucked underneath. Stories are fine, or names, if you can spare them. Once, not the baby ones, not yet. I told myself it was a performance art collective with a cruel sense of humor. I told myself I'd move. I left a box half-packed on the table for 3 days. Every time I sealed it, the tape peeled back on its own while I slept, and the items reappeared exactly where they'd been. On a Tuesday, the upstairs got impatient. The same opened earlier than usual, 11:40, and the air grew dense, humid as breath. My name spilled through the vents, closer this time, almost shaped like a voice I recognized. Mom's? No. The vowels were too careful, like someone copying a sound they'd only read about. I retreated to the bathroom and turned on the fan. The fan coughed and stopped. The hum of the mini-fridge dimmed. Somewhere above me, plaster rustled, and a dent pushed down over the doorway, a shallow thumbprint in fresh dough. I set the jar of teeth on the counter because I didn't know what else to do with it. It looked obscene sitting there among the toothpaste and the bar of soap. On impulse, curiosity is its own hunger. I plucked the smallest tooth from the jar and held it up to the light. The root was clean, the enamel milk white and still faintly warm. Start with milk, the note had said. Stories are fine, the other note had said. I sat on the edge of the tub and told the ceiling about my 5th birthday, about the cake with the plastic dinosaur toppers, about how my dad never made it because of work, and how my mom said it was okay, really. He'd call later, and how I smiled too wide so she'd think I believed her. I told it the color of the frosting and the way the candles bent in the draft, and how, that night, one of my teeth came out. How proud I'd been to put it under my pillow and pretend. When I finished, the seam closed with a soft little the sound people make when they swallow and pretend it's nothing. The fridge kicked back on. The fan spun. The jar on the counter was lighter by one tooth. After that, feeding it got easy. I cooked ramen and talked to the ceiling about school, about jobs, about that terrible quiet drive back from the clinic 2 summers ago when I realized love could be a subtraction. The upstairs listened. It trembled at the good parts. It drank the milk. It took another tooth. It started leaving things for me too. On Thursday morning, there was a folded paper crane on the doormat made from my old lease application, the one with all the blanks filled perfectly in my handwriting except for the emergency contact line, which read US. On Friday, my mother called for the first time in months. "I had the strangest dream," she said, voice soft around the words. "You were in a white room with no windows. I couldn't get to you. Something told me to stay upstairs." She paused. "Are you eating enough?" I told her yes. I was leaving parts of myself in bottles and stories and tiny calcium monuments. I was not hungry. The third Saturday, the upstairs got bold. The seam opened wide enough to show a dark, muscular ring, flexing, a soft palate. The bulges between the beams tightened to ridges. The room smelled like warm pennies and milk, and the faint antiseptic note of a dentist's office. A low, eager sound rolled through the vents, almost a purr. "Names, if you can spare them," the note had said. "Try mine," I whispered, and immediately wished I hadn't. The ceiling repeated it. My name. Exactly right. Somehow wrong. The wrong part wasn't the sound. It was the ownership. It said my name like it was collecting it, like the shape of me in the world had slid a little closer to that dark throat. I slept in the doorway, half in the hall, because it felt safer to be between a mouth and a door. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to warm air stroking my face, the seam yawning above like a sleepy smile. I could smell milk. I could smell me. Skin and shampoo and old fear. The upstairs breathed my name again, then added a second one, low and hoarse and familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. My father's. I hadn't said his name. The next morning, there was a new line on the rent receipt. Acquisitions, paternal. The pencil marks shimmered, as if damp. I called my mom. No answer. The voicemail clicked. My own voice said, "Leave it here." When I hung up, the room exhaled, satisfied, and a single gray hair drifted down from the seam to land on my pillow. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the ceiling pulse and thought about how cheap this place was, how bargains always have a mouth. When the landlord finally knocked, it was noon and hot. Sunlight pressed like a hand against the metal of the gate. He stood on the steps, face pale as paper, and didn't meet my eyes. He held a manila envelope that squished slightly when he turned it. "You've been generous," he said. His voice sounded like it had been cleared with a tongue instead of a cough. "It's time for the addendum." "What addendum?" He slid the envelope through the bars. I didn't want to touch it, but it was already mine. You know that feeling? When an object has you before you decide? Inside was a single page titled Addendum to Lease, Occupancy Transfer. The rest was a tangle of legalese that hurt to look at. In the signature lines, my name appeared twice. The first looked like mine. The second looked like my handwriting after a fever. "What happens if I don't sign?" I asked. He flinched. The ceiling above me trembled. Happy. "It gets hungry," he said. "And when it's hungry, it chews through the floorboards and the studs and the space between names. It will find yours anyway. This way is cleaner." Who was here before me? He pinched the bridge of his nose. We don't say their names after. That's the point. He took a careful step back. Midnight. I spent the afternoon packing for real. The boxes stayed taped. I set them by the door and stacked them like barricades. When sunset bruised the top of the steps purple, I dragged my mattress into the hallway under the bare bulb. I left the addendum on the table and tried to ignore it. The paper pulsed faintly. It had a heartbeat. At 11:58 p.m., the ceiling began to soften, paint sweating, seam fattening. The air tasted metallic and sweet. My phone buzzed, though there was no service. A text from an unknown number. Upstairs. Open. Another. Be quiet. Another. Come home. I locked the door and put a chair under the knob. I sat with my back against it and held the jar of teeth like a grenade without a pin. The first knock on the ceiling came at 12 o'clock exactly, not from above, from inside. A careful tap, the polite rap of someone who knows they're welcome. I didn't answer. The second knock was a little harder. The third arrived with my name, spoken perfectly, then chewed, then swallowed, then spoken again like practice. The seam peeled back to a smile. Please, it breathed, and this time the voice was right. Mine, not borrowed, not copied. I heard my own little cough, my own habit of swallowing before important words. Please, it hurts to be two. I pressed my hands over my ears. Through the muffle I heard another voice, the hoarse one from the other night, saying, "Kiddo?" Then a chorus of others, softer, voices that belonged to my edges. A middle school teacher, a barista who once spelled my name wrong, my ex saying "hey" in the doorway after the clinic. The ceiling had learned them. It laid them like plates. The paper rustled on the table. I didn't look, but I knew. The addendum had shifted closer on its own. The pencil beside it, my pencil, tapped like a tooth against wood. I stood because sitting felt like surrender, and because fight or flight sometimes means stand and be named. I took the paper in shaking hands and read out loud the only line that mattered. Tenant agrees to transfer occupancy of self to upstairs unit, maintaining quiet and offering in perpetuity. 2 signature lines. 2 versions of me. Only one would stay in the lease ledger of the world. The seam widened. Air moved across my face, warm as a summer attic. It won't be so bad, my voice said from the dark. You'll be upstairs. No more stairs. No more hunger. We'll be quiet together. What happens to the one downstairs? I asked, and the upstairs smiled with its breath, and somewhere above the soft palate flexed, and all the vents in the building sighed in unison like a sleeping animal turning over. You'll be the room, it said gently. You'll be the rules. I almost signed because the relief of relief is its own addiction, because I was tired of being hungry for names that didn't love me back, because the ceiling knew my father's voice and sounded kinder in his throat. Instead, I did the only rude thing left. I broke Rule 1. I banged on the ceiling with a jar of teeth. Once, twice, again. Glass shattered. Fragments sank into the soft plaster like candies into icing. The seam spasmed and snapped shut with a wet slap that sprayed me with warm milk and something copper. A hiss bled through the vents, thin and furious like steam under a door. The building woke up. Walls groaned. The bulb overhead popped and died. Everything tilted, just a hair, the way an animal tilts its head before it bites. From above, heavy steps, no, chews, moved, deliberate, toward my spot by the door. The locks clicked, one by one, not opening but agreeing. The landlord pounded on the gate, shouting words I couldn't understand because the vents were saying my name 100 different ways, pitching it higher, lower, making it tender, making it cruel. The door shook in its frame. The chair skidded back. Something pushed on the other side. Not a hand, a tongue. I grabbed a shard of glass and sliced across the addendum through both versions of my name. Paper bled. The room screamed without sound, the way a vacuum screams when you pull the plug, and the pressure dropped so suddenly my ears popped. The seam in the ceiling opened wide, furious, showing a dark tunnel knotted with muscle that flexed like a throat trying not to choke. You can't starve a mouth by refusing to feed it. You can only teach it to hunt. The door finally burst. Light from the stairwell knifed in. The landlord's face appeared wet and chalky. He held out a hand. Behind him, the steps glistened like gums. "Come on!" he yelled. I ran. As I cleared the threshold, the tongue slammed down where I'd been and dragged, pulling carpet up in a wet peel. The door clapped shut, not because we closed it, but because the building bit down. We stumbled up the steps. The gate, blessedly, was open. The yard was a square of night and weeds. The landlord shoved me into it and slammed the gate and immediately doubled over, hands on his knees, retching quietly like a man who'd just swallowed the wrong name. I looked back through the bars. The basement door bulged outward, then flattened. The house took a long breath and settled. The night went still, like a held tongue. "You can't leave," the landlord whispered finally, not looking at me. "Not really. That's not how this works." "I'm leaving." He shook his head. "It already has your name. You think you cut it out, but that was just the paper. Names don't live on paper. They live in mouths, in vents, in people who'll say them when you walk away." I walked anyway. I made it 3 blocks before I realized my phone would only call one number and the voicemail would always be me saying, "Leave it here." And my mother would dream of stairs forever. And every apartment ceiling would look a little damp to me in certain light. The world changes shape when a house learns you. I didn't go back for my things. The upstairs can keep them. It can keep the version of me that signs papers and follows rules and feeds what asks nicely. Let it starve on my silence. But when I rent the next place, I'll knock on the ceiling once. I'll listen for the swallow. And if I hear it, if you hear it, don't feed it milk. Don't tell it your birthday. Don't teach it the weight of your father's voice. If someone knocks from the vents and asks your name, ignore it. And if the request sounds exactly like you, whispering from just above the light, begging please, move out before midnight. Because if you don't, you won't just live underneath a mouth. You'll become the echo that teaches it how to chew.